The story arc of Old Testament into New is very simply this, that following Jesus is about heart transformation, not behavior modification.
Stories of the Bible. Cain and Abel. Adam and Eve had two sons named Cain and Abel. When Cain and Abel grew up, Cain became a farmer, while Abel became a shepherd.
Come on, sheep!
When it was time for the harvest, Cain and Abel both brought gifts to God. Cain gathered some of the things he had grown and gave them to God.
Here you go.
God wasn't pleased with Cain and his offering, and this made Cain upset. God asked, "Why are you so angry? Do what is right, and then you will be accepted." God warned Cain about sin. God told Cain to be careful not to let sin control him, but instead to take control of sin.
Wow.
Abel also gave a gift to God.
Here you go.
Abel gave God the best part of his firstborn sheep from his flock. God was very pleased with Abel and his offering because he had given the best of what he had.
All right.
Well, all right. And then Cain killed his brother. So spoiler alert there. Honestly, this story, the story of Cain and Abel is a famous one. It's not just famous like in church settings. It's a famous story in culture. The story of Cain and Abel is something that whether you grew up in church or not, you've probably heard about. Funny enough, maybe sadly enough, my friends and I growing up, we used to have this joke where I'd say, "Man, I love you like a brother," and they'd be like, "Yeah, thanks, man." Like Cain loved Abel, And so there's some cultural stuff to this, but really the story of Cain and Abel is an interesting one because I would say that out of all the stories that we are going to cover over this series, the story of Cain and Abel is taught through so many different lenses, and I would say that often the story of Cain and Abel is taught through a lens that is really not helpful for kids, and it's definitely not helpful for us as adults. And so today my hope is that we can look at the story of Cain and Abel through the lens that it was intended to be seen through, and that it helps us understand not just what the story of Cain and Abel is really all about, but what you and I are to do with this story and how we can apply the things we learn in this story to our life today. And this is really important because the Old Testament, so the Bible is made up of two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is helpful for our lives. And I would say that sometimes followers of Jesus, depending on the church setting that you came up in, we don't really know what to do with the Old Testament sometimes. And maybe the way that it was taught to you or the way that you learned about it wasn't all that helpful, or maybe it was just really infantile, like the video we just got done watching, where it's cute and funny, come on, sheep, but it doesn't really help you in your adult life. And in some way, shape, or form, you experienced a reality where as you grew up, your faith didn't grow with you, that somehow the way that we talked about it last week, that your childhood understanding of the Bible didn't grow up with you. And because it didn't grow up with you, your childhood faith couldn't hold up to the rigors of your adult experience. You grew up, life got hard, and these little stories that you learn from the Old Testament, especially because that tends to be where most churches spend a lot of their time with young kids, because it's so much easier to follow a narrative story than to understand all the complexities found in the firsthand accounts of Jesus in the New Testament, that it's kind of easier to tell a story about Noah and the ark, or it's easier to tell a story about Cain and Abel and sacrifice. We miss out on helping adults know what to do with these important stories and to help us understand our lives and to understand God and his great love for us through these ancient stories. Now, last week we talked about how the New Testament gives us principles. The New Testament in its design is to help us understand what it looks like to know and follow Jesus. It is good news for those who hear it, that it's all about Jesus and why he came, his ultimate rescue mission for all of humanity. That's what the New Testament is all about. And in the New Testament, we find all of these principles for what it looks like for me and for you to not just know about Jesus, but to know him personally and to follow him and to make him our king. principles that you and I can live by. And the Old Testament is different. The Old Testament gives us pictures. It gives us a lens through which we can understand God. It gives us a lens through which we can understand humanity. It gives us a lens through which we can understand ourselves. The Old Testament, when we pull out of it and see the 30,000-foot view of all of the Old Testament, it's really the story of me and you. And the story of Cain and Abel is the story of me and you as well. This story is the story of my life and the story of your life, whether you and I realize it or not. The story of Cain and Abel, was the way that it was, told to me growing up, is very simple, right? Two guys had different sacrifices. God liked one. He didn't like the other. And because of that, Cain was punished. He got mad and killed his brother. And that was the end of the story. But what do we do with that as adults today? What do we do with these ancient stories, and how do they matter in our world today, especially with the New Testament at our fingertips, especially with Jesus being who we believe he is here at Anthem? Now, here's just what I want to say is that if you're not a follower of Jesus and you're still on the fence about what it looks like to know and follow him, maybe you have big questions about the Bible, and the Old Testament in particular is really difficult for you. Here's what I want to just remind you of, is that you don't read things because you believe that they're true. You read things and you're curious about things to discover if they could be true. And so today, for me and for you, I would love for you to be open-minded. In fact, one of the main characteristics of wisdom is to always be willing to have your mind changed. That there's a possibility that you could learn something. And so my hope today is that you and I, as we approach this story, that maybe, just maybe, you'd be open to learning something new about you, and maybe to learn something new about God. Now, ultimately, this story is a story of sacrifice. And if you know anything about ancient cultures, especially ancient Near Eastern cultures, there's something that's true about every single culture that we study that is ancient in the ancient Near Eastern time period. All of them, no matter where they were and how they had formed their religion, all of them participated in sacrifice. And the Jewish people were no different in this way. All cultures that were studied, if you ever want to do a deep dive on this, there's this book called Sapiens that, again, is not a brief read at all, but if you read the book of Sapiens, you look all the way back, it's the history of the world and the history of humans, you see that every single culture that we see in some way, shape, or form believed that there was some cosmic being, and that cosmic being was not in good, that we were not in good standing with him or her, and we needed to make some sacrifices. We needed to please the gods or God in some way, shape, or form, that somehow, to be right with this higher cosmic power, we had to do something to be right with him. And after the fall in the garden and Adam and Eve are kicked out, they have children named Cain and Abel. And while there is no prescriptive command from God early on in the text about sacrifice, it's very clear that Cain and Abel participate and sacrifice. And so today in Genesis 4, that's really what we're going to be talking about, is sacrifice. If you want to follow along with me, we're going to be in Genesis 4, and then we're going to hop around to a bunch of different places today. If you brought your Bible with you, hey, and by the way, if you don't have a Bible, we have free Bibles in the gallery. Would love for you to grab one and bring it with you or use it at home. I think it would be helpful for your faith for sure. So here's where we're going to sit today. This is Genesis 4. This is the account of Cain and Abel. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. Now, different translations say this in slightly different ways. Some translations would say that Abel brought the best portions. In this case, the fat portions, the most marbled meat. If you've ever been to Publix or been to a meat store and you're picking out good meat, this would be the prime cut. This would be the piece with the most marble. If you're a grill master, you know marble is a good thing, right? Abel knew that, and he brought that to God. Cain, on the other hand, he brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, which wasn't a bad thing. He was still participating in the sacrifice. And the verse goes on and lets us know that God looked on Abel's offering with favor. The author of Genesis says this, that the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. If you saw the little video clip that we played, we saw that, right? And Cain shows up and he's like, here you go, and he's brought his offering and Abel's brought his. And for whatever reason, God was not pleased with Cain's offering. And if you grew up, depending on the church setting that you grew up in, there were some scholars even that believed that the reason why God was upset with Cain's offering was because it wasn't an offering that required blood, that it wasn't the killing of an animal, which doesn't make sense because ultimately God was perfectly okay with grain offerings. We see that all throughout the Old Testament. Some scholars believe that it was because it wasn't the best fruit, that it was just some of the fruit and vegetables that Cain brought. Ultimately, most scholars would agree that the reason why Cain's offering wasn't accepted and the reason why it wasn't received from God was not because of the content of the gift. It wasn't the content of the sacrifice. It was something deeper and it was something different. Additionally, Cain wasn't a bad guy. I grew up hearing that Cain was like this bad dude, that maybe he was just born broken, he was born bad, and he was always against God. Honestly, here's what's true about Cain. Cain was a good person doing good things. He was a farmer. He worked hard. He had a family. He was probably a pretty good dude. And he was participating in the religious traditions of the day. He was doing the thing. Cain was a good person doing good things. But here's what's true about the story of Cain and Abel is that it helps you and I realize the bigger story of the Old Testament. The bigger story even of the New Testament is that Cain's story is like my story and yours. We realize that ultimately, doing good isn't good enough. That doing good for goodness sake and just having good behavior and being on our best behavior, that somehow that still just isn't good enough, that there's something deeper and there is something more. That ultimately, as life goes on and things get more chaotic and things get harder, especially for us as adults, and we can try so hard to be good and do the right thing, that the story of Jesus and the story of the Old Testament is a bunch of people trying to do good and trying to be good, but somehow falling short again and again. One of my friends who's a part of our church, who's significantly smarter than me. He's a brilliant scientist, and I am not. He texted me after my message last Sunday, and he said, "Man, really enjoyed your message." He said, "It really made me think of the second law of thermodynamics." And I was like, that's exactly what I was going for. That's exactly what I was doing. But the second law of thermodynamics tells us that in nature, that ultimately that everything moves towards a greater set order of randomness and chaos. That's the Shrek version of what science really says. But here's what I will tell you, is that all throughout the Old Testament and all throughout my life and yours, that we can see that when things are left alone, that when they're just left to their own devices, that they lead towards more and more chaos. That is Cain's story as well. That ultimately, even when we do our best and we do good, that chaos is on the other side of something. And some of you have experienced this. You're like, man, I'm doing so good right now. Everything was going so great, and yet there's still chaos in my life. There's still things that are unraveling. There's still relationships that are failing. There's still brokenness that exists in the world. It's because ultimately what started in the garden that we talked about last week and continued on through Cain and Abel has continued in your life and mine today. Ultimately, that this idea of just being good and doing good, that it wasn't good enough. We see that in Cain's story. And Jesus talked a lot about this as well. And it's actually a theme all throughout the Old Testament. Hosea, who was a prophet, had this to say to the nation of Israel at one point, to the Israelites in ancient Israel. He said, "For I desire mercy." He's speaking on behalf of God. And he says, God would say that I desire mercy, not sacrifice, an acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. This would have been so confusing for them. They're like, time out. We've been doing burnt offerings the whole time. And Hosea's like, hey, don't shoot the messenger, man. I'm just speaking for God here. And they're like, yeah. Who told us we thought to do burnt offerings? And Hosea goes, no, you're missing the point. The whole point of this was never about the burnt offerings. The whole point of this was never about picking grains and fruits and veggies and putting them on an altar and lighting them on fire and going, we're good now. The whole point of sacrifice, Jesus explains in the book of Matthew. Matthew chapter 12, there's this amazing moment where Jesus and his disciples are walking, and Jesus has just gotten done doing ministry with his disciples. And the Pharisees, who held so tightly to the law, they were the religious leaders of the day, they stopped Jesus and his disciples because they noticed that Jesus and his disciples are eating food on the side of the road on the Sabbath. And they would say, hold on a second, that's not in alignment with with what God has taught. That's not in alignment with our religiosity. That's not in alignment with our rules and regulations that God gave to us. And Jesus responds to the Pharisees, and he points back to Hosea, and he points back to the story of Cain and Abel, and he points back to the reality of what happened in the garden. This is what he says. This is Jesus speaking. He said, if you had known what these words mean, or if you had known what these words and these commands were really about, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would have not condemned the innocent. In other words, Hosea would say, and Jesus would say, and Cain and Abel would ultimately say if they were here today, the whole point of this sacrifice thing is not about what we give to God. It's not about right behavior. It's about the condition of our heart. The author of Hebrews makes this very clear in the way that he points to the story of Cain and Abel as well. This is what he writes. He says, by faith, not by great, sacrifice or great offering, but by faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous. When God spoke well of his offerings, and by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. It goes on in verse 6. And he says, and without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. The story arc of Old Testament into New is very simply this, that following Jesus is about heart transformation, not behavior modification. Cain didn't understand that. Cain would have said, God, I did the thing. You told me to bring an offering to you, and I did it. Didn't you like the fruit? God's going, Cain, you're missing the point. The thing that I want is your heart. I want your love for me. I want a relationship with you. You showing up with a bunch of fruits and veggies is not doing it for me. You're missing the point. Abel wasn't rewarded because he brought good lamb chops. He was rewarded because what he gave to God and what was in his heart was in alignment. Ultimately, God wants your whole heart. If you grew up in a church setting that didn't make that clear to you, if you grew up in a church setting that was all about rules and regulations and behavior modification, I want you to know that is not why Jesus came. Jesus didn't come to make sure that you're really good in a classroom setting. He didn't come to make sure you wouldn't get your name on the board. He came for something so much bigger and so much better than that. He came for your whole heart. Isn't it true that this behavior modification stuff is so exhausting? Some of you walked away from faith because the treadmill of just trying to edit your behavior and bring better sacrifices to God and just to do more good for goodness sake, all while completely neglecting the thing that Jesus actually came for, which is something that can't be seen. It's something under the surface. It's your heart. It's exhausting. And I've sat across from so many people over almost 14 years of ministry at this point who are exhausted because they would say, John, I'm trying to be a Christian. I'm trying so hard to be good. I'm trying so hard to please God. And I would sit across from people and I would say, hey, you're missing the point. And Cain did too, so don't feel bad because I missed it and you're missing it and Cain missed it and the Pharisees on the side of the road with Jesus, they missed it too. The point of following Jesus, the reason why he came wasn't to give us better rules. It was to give us a better king. He came for your whole heart, not just for you to behave better. And here's why. It's because of a scientific reality that this makes so much more sense to me. When I was growing up, we had a garden in our backyard, and we had about 6 orange trees and a fig tree and a banana tree. And I learned about this very important scientific word, and it's this. It is phytothoria. And here's what this means. This means that underneath the surface of trees and plants, there's something happening that impacts everything else. I learned about this word when I was about 14 years old because one of our citrus trees bloomed and produced a ton of fruit out of season. It was the weirdest thing. All of our other orange trees had no oranges on them, but this one was covered in oranges. My mom sent us out there to pick them. We were like, little kids. I'm the oldest of four. And we go out and we pick these oranges. And, we picked about half of them. The other half were used in orange wars. I don't know if you're familiar with orange wars. It's where you waste a ton of fruit and peg your siblings with them. And we're out there, we're picking them, and my siblings are annoyed, and I'm annoyed, and I'm out there on this ladder, and I'm picking these oranges off, and they just looked a little weird. And I remember asking my brother, like, hey, doesn't this orange look weird to you? It just looks different. He's like, I don't care, dude. Just put them in the laundry basket so we can be done, My mom would give the oranges away, those like teacher's gifts and stuff. She was so excited about these oranges. And while I was on the ladder, I broke into one of the oranges, and it just looked different, and I tasted it. It was the worst orange I've ever tasted. And so I brought some inside, and I brought one to my mom, and I was like, Mom, these oranges are broken. I don't know what to tell you, So she opens one up and unpeels it, and she eats it. And my mom's like such a polite person, she like grabbed a paper towel and, pulled it out. And she's like, this is terrible. There's something wrong with our orange tree. And what we found out was that our tree had phytothoria, which is the fancy word for root rot. You see, my dad had built a detached garage, and in so doing, had accidentally created a reality where that one orange tree got way too much water. It was just basically sitting in mud below the surface. And one of the things that happens with trees and with plants when they have root rot is that in their final ditch effort, in their final mode of panic, they bloom out of season and they produce fruit or they produce flowers right before they die. And the fruit's no good. You see, our tree had a problem. It had root rot. Below the surface, everything was going bad. Ultimately, that tree died. We had to cut it down. And when we dug up those roots, when we pulled it out, it was all mush and had like worms in it. It was disgusting. But you would have never known it standing in our yard looking at this beautiful tree that had fruit all over it. I learned in that moment, and maybe you've learned in your life, that what's going on below the surface, that what's happening on the inside will eventually impact the outside. That ultimately, we can be a tree that produces some fruit, but that when it really gets down to it, that when it gets down to actually seeing the goodness of that fruit, that ultimately, it's not very good. That ultimately you and I, we can edit our behavior, we can show up at church on Sunday, we can raise our hands, you can serve in kids ministry, you can give money to nonprofits, you can feed the homeless, you can scan a QR code on Fourth Sunday, and we're gonna clap and celebrate. And all of that is good. But it's not why Jesus came. He didn't come so that you and I could be good for goodness sake. You see, the most important thing that Jesus came to do was to save you and I from ourselves. Because left to our own devices, or the second law of thermodynamics, you and I will ultimately descend into chaos. He didn't come to give us a better like blueprint for just being a good person. He came for something more. He came for your heart. Because he knows that if he can get your heart, that everything else will flow from that. That if the roots are good, the fruit will be good. That if it's well cared for and the soil is good and the environment around you and I is good, that it begins to transform us from the inside out. That is what Jesus is interested in. That's the story of the New Testament. Is that when we decide to fully submit and surrender to knowing and following Jesus, that he transforms us from the inside out. And I'm sorry that you may have experienced or may have been told by another church that that's not how it works. I love that there are people in our church who are showing up here, just like I did a very long time ago, after getting hammered at the bar the night before. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you're here and you're involved in all types of stuff that looks nothing like what Jesus taught. Here's what I know, is that Jesus didn't come to first fix your behavior. He first came to pursue your heart. And if he can have that, everything else will change. But here's just what's true, is that you and I, we can play the behavior modification game and we can fake it for a little while, but eventually the fruit's gonna come up rotten. And maybe it's something in your marriage, or maybe it's something in your relationship with your kids or your finances. Maybe it's some other sin that's living inside of you. anything nobody knows about, but ultimately, phytothoria is going to kick in and the roots are going to be rotten and it's going to impact everything about your life. Because here's just what's true for me and for you, and this is like a hard thing for us to really wrestle with. But our external compliance, like just doing the right stuff, will never mask our internal defiance. Don't miss this. We cannot use external compliance to mask internal defiance. Some of you have experienced this. I've experienced this. I've been on the other side, and people have been on the other side of me playing the game and just behaving and doing good for goodness sake to try to cover up what's really going on underneath. Just like our orange tree that blossomed and bloomed and put out a bunch of fruit, it was doing its last-ditch effort to go, I'm fine, everything's good. And everything wasn't good. And everything wasn't good with Cain either. And the book of Genesis goes on in the following verses, and it lets us know that God knew that everything wasn't good either. That even though Cain was playing the game and he was bringing the fruits and veggies and he was showing up and here you go, God knew that there was something deeper that he needed to do in Cain's life and something deeper that he needs to do in your life and deeper that he needs to do in mine too. This is what Genesis kind of continues on in this story for us. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you so angry? Why are you so frustrated with me that I wasn't okay with your performative gift? Why are you upset with me that I want something more out of you? And it's not better, actions. It's intimacy. It's closeness. It's something deeper. It's something more. Why are you so upset with me, Cain? Why is your face so downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? It goes on in verse 7. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door and it desires to have you, but you must rule over it. This is not this idea that you're going to walk out the door and trip and fall over sin and be like, I don't know how that got there. This is this idea that when the roots are bad, that the consequences of sin are only millimeters away. That the consequences of my brokenness and the consequences of your brokenness, even though it seems like we can keep them at bay for a little while, we can fake it till we make it just long enough. But that it's going to catch up with us. Some of you grew up in homes where this was true, where it seemed like everything was okay. And then what was really going on, maybe in your mom's heart or your dad's heart, it showed up and everything broke. Some of you have seen this in your own marriages. You've seen this with your kids. You know that we can play the game on the outside and be completely dead inside. And God knew that too, and he knew that in Cain. He says, Cain, I just want to warn you. You can keep trying to play the game. You can keep showing up with offerings. You can still be a good guy and do good. But what's under the surface will only stay there for a little while. And in the very next verse, verse 8, Cain invites his brother Abel out to a field to just hang out for a little while. And he murders his brother. Now look, I'm obviously in no way suggesting that you're going to be a murderer. But what I am suggesting is that you and I are both uniquely equipped to create our own versions of chaos. I know what the John Birkmire brand of chaos is, and you know what your brand of chaos is. I'm uniquely aware of my ability to royally screw things up. It's why I'm so grateful for Jesus. And it's why I'm so grateful for the 5 men who have a front row seat to my life, who I talk to on the phone every single month, and who start our phone call asking me the worst question ever. You know what it is? What's the one thing you hope I don't ask you about today? I hate that question. But that question has probably saved my life. And it's probably saved my marriage. It has probably saved my ministry. Because what starts in the dark grows in the dark. And if it stays in the dark, it will blow up your life. Because if the roots are rotten, so will the fruit. So will the fruit. And this is hard for us because we don't like these messages, right? You're like, John, it'd be really great if you taught a message today about how to parent more better, like that'd be a more fun message than this one. I get that. But I would not be a good pastor if I didn't say that I have root problems too. And so do you. that you and I have missed the mark. This word sin is something we don't like, that maybe depending upon the church setting you grew up in, where this idea of sin was just used to like create and separate people and put people in the sinner bucket and the holy bucket and all of that messy stuff. It's especially true in the South. It's like sin, condemnation, casseroles, and sweet tea, like that's how I grew up. Is like, we're going to make sure everybody feels really bad about themselves and then eat casserole afterwards. It's like, I feel a lot better now, But here's what's true, is that this word sin shows up in the Greek and the Hebrew. And in both cases, that word is directly connected to archery. And you go, that's weird. And here's why this is important for me and you, is this word sin is used whenever an archer would aim for a target and pull back and shoot for the bullseye and miss. The judge who is watching this archery tournament would say sin, which means you missed the mark. You missed the bullseye. In this life, in our relationship with Jesus, if you're a human being, all of us have missed the mark. We've shot arrow after arrow after arrow, and I have missed every single time. Because the last perfect person to walk this earth died on a cross. And so you've missed the mark, and so have I. That is sin. Jesus is the bullseye. He would say, hey, listen, you're never going to be able to be perfect. That's why I came. Your sacrifices will never be enough. They're always going to fall short. It's why I'm not worried about sacrifice. It's why I'm not focused on behavior. I came for your heart first, because I know that if I can have that everything that I want to see out of this life and everything that you will begin to embody as a result of knowing me will begin to show up. And it will be real, and it will be long-lasting, and it will be good fruit. This idea of sin is hard for me and for you, and we can't talk about sin without talking about the love of Jesus. And Tim Keller did that better than most. He's one of my favorite pastors and one of my favorite authors, and he had this to say about sin, my sin and yours. You are more sinful than you could dare imagine, and you are more loved and more accepted than you could dare to hope. In other words, your root system has got more worms and more bugs and more soft spots, and your fruit's not that great. And yet, you're such a great tree. I love you. And I came for you fully knowing everything that you would ever do, everything you would ever think. And I love you just the same. And yeah, fruit's important, but you know what's more important? The root. In my life and in yours, the root is our heart. It's what's going on below the surface. It's the thing that nobody sees. And if you and I are really honest, there's stuff in me, and I'd be willing to bet there's stuff inside of you that doesn't look a whole lot like Jesus. There's some stuff inside of us that happens in our thought life, that happens in our relationships. There's stuff that happens in our finances that isn't in alignment with what Jesus taught and who he is. And the only way that you and I will ever get there is through relationship with him. The only way that we will ever look anything remotely like Jesus and not be exhausted from the being good for goodness sake treadmill or the fake it till you make it Christian Bible thing, like whatever that is for you, whatever you feel like you have to do to perform up to God's standard, it won't happen unless you have him. Following Jesus is not about behavior modification. It's about heart transformation. Following Jesus is about heart transformation, not behavior modification, again and again and again and again. And the promise of the New Testament and the promise of Jesus and the promise of all the eyewitnesses that spent time with Jesus is that the only remedy for heart issues is intimacy with Jesus. The only remedy for what's going on in your mind and in your heart that's broken and is hurting your marriage right now, or is hurting your relationship with your kids, or hurting your relationship with your roommate, or bringing you back to the same websites over and over again, or bringing you back to the same bar over and over again. I don't know what your thing is, but you have a thing. And Jesus loves you and accepts you and goes, my way is better. If you could just spend some time with me, if you could just really know me, if you could stop trying so hard, stop being a try-hard, and just spend some time with me, we can take care of this heart issue. Anthem Church, the only remedy for issues of the heart is intimacy with Jesus. The only way that you will know him is if you spend time with him. The only way to be intimate with someone is spend time with them, to get to know them. Imagine, if you will, when you got married, if you're a married person or your parents or you know people that are married, I don't need to go there. That the moment you got married, that instead of going on your honeymoon, one person moved to New York, the other person moved to California, you're like, we're fine, everything's fine. We never talk, we never spend time with each other, but our marriage is great. The bride of Christ operates that way every day. This local church operates that way every day. We have been given this unbelievable love letter. We've been given this opportunity to know the heart of God, to know what he taught, to know about his great love for you, to know the heart of the Father, and yet, me included, it stays in the car or stays on our phone. We have things that burden our hearts and our minds, and we don't go to him in prayer. We don't talk to him about it. The remedy for your heart issue is not just showing up on Sunday and checking the box and, giving a couple $100 and doing the fourth Sunday thing and feeding the homeless and being a philanthropist and giving to, what. All of that is great. But if Jesus doesn't have your heart, if he's not your king, none of it matters in the end. Being good for goodness sake will still separate you from Jesus forever. Anthem, can we stop playing the church game? Please stop. It's not good for you. It's not good for your relationship with Jesus. Can we stop pretending like showing up on Sunday is doing it for you? Because it's not. It's one small piece of the picture. It's one small piece of the love story. It's one small piece of this incredible relationship that you have with Jesus. And if you're new to this whole thing, if you're new to faith and you just started following Jesus, here's the great news. He didn't come to change your behavior. He came to be your king and to change your heart and to transform you from the inside out. So Anthem, when somebody shows up here at our church on Sunday and they don't look like they fit in the part, you welcome them. And if there's somebody in your small group whose marriage is a mess, you welcome them, because you and I should be less concerned about behavior and more concerned about intimacy with Christ. And the best way for somebody to know God is to first know someone who knows God. So if you're broken and you're showing up today and your life doesn't look a whole lot like Jesus, keep showing up. Because the promise of your king and mine is that he will meet you here. And he will meet you in your car before school. And he'll meet you in the mornings on your front porch. And that intimacy will transform you from the inside out. Stop trying to be transformed by the outside in. It doesn't work. You'll just produce fruit that's no good. As we wrap up today, I want to ask you two questions that I hope you'll chew on this week. Do you view God in the same way that Cain did, as a transactional relationship, that God is just someone to appease by our good behavior, that being a do-gooder is somehow good enough? Is that how you see God? Did you maybe grow up in a context where that was what was told to you? It's like, hey man, as long as you blend in on Sundays, you're good. Just don't cuss, Do the right things. That somehow that's good enough, that somehow Jesus is up in heaven, But if he doesn't know you, there will come a day where you will be separated from him for forever. He wants your whole heart. That is the story of Cain and Abel. And it's the story of the New Testament. And it's the story of Jesus. And it's why he came. For your heart. Do you view your relationship with God as transactional, or do you view it as an opportunity for intimacy with the Creator and Savior of the world? And you know how you'll know the answer to that question? It's by how much time you spend with him next week versus how much time you spend doing good. Because if it's just performative and you don't really spend time with him, then there's something broken. There's something in the roots that need to be dug up and evaluated. If you're the nicest person in Gainesville, but you don't spend any time with Jesus, you are missing a portion of what it means to be a follower of him, to submit to his authority over your life. Do you view God transactionally or relationally? And last question. Does what is in your hand match what is in your heart? Because for Cain, it did. He showed up with, for Cain, it didn't. He showed up with the sacrifice. He did the good thing, right? He was like, God, in the video, he goes, here we go. He did the religious thing, but what was in his heart was no good. For Abel, what was in his hand matched what was in his heart. He had a deep love for God, and that showed up through what was in his hand. Does what is in your hand match what is in your heart? If you're doing so much good, but there's hatred and lust and unforgiveness and all types of things inside of your heart and soul, God is not impressed with your great behavior. He came to transform you and I from the inside out. Anthem Church, does what is in your hand match what is in your heart? And if your heart has this deep love for God and I'm so close to him, he's my king, he's my savior, and there's no fruit, there's nothing that shows the world that, then there's something broken there too. Because following Jesus will change our inside first and our outside later. And if you've been following Jesus for a long time and your outside has not been transformed yet, then there's something that you and him need to figure out together. And it probably means that you love Jesus, but you haven't made him your king. You haven't fully submitted and surrendered to him. If you don't know Jesus yet and you're curious about this and you're like, man, this message was not fun, it was not great, didn't like it, not coming back again, I would love for you to come back next week. Every once in a while, I have to have these talks with our family to remind me and to remind our church that following Jesus is about more than just behaving well. It's about fully submitting and surrendering to a king who died for me and died for you. That's the story of Cain and Abel. That's the story of you. That's the story of Jesus. Let me pray for you. Jesus, I'm so grateful for this story of Cain and Abel, and it's a tough one. God, it's so much easier for us. It actually feels better to just be able to do the right stuff, to just be good at being good. It's so much easier that way, but God, you came for so much more than that. You want our whole life. You want our whole heart. You want to transform us from the inside out. God, it's so easy to engage in performative religiosity. It's just not good for us. It's so easy for us to act right. It is just easier. But you want to do some deep work in us. So God, would you help me and would you help all of us this week to allow you to do the work that you want to do in us? That you would transform us literally from the inside out, that we would give you our hearts first, that we would fully submit and surrender to you first, because that's why you came. That's what we put our life and our hope. That's why we put our life and our hope in your hands. We're so grateful for your radical love for us, that while we were yet separated from you and sinners, you came and you died because of your radical love for us. We're grateful for that. I am grateful for that. It's in your name we pray. Amen.